Wages and labor costs are important factors in any economy, including Zimbabwe. There is growing emphasis on competitiveness to enhance prospects for economic growth. Labor is at the center of competitiveness. The most precious asset for any business is labor, and wages are therefore compensation for making that asset available on a market. Zimbabwean enterprises are operating under a highly uncompetitive business regime characterized by high labor costs, a high utility cost burden, costly access to working capital and investment capital. Since 2000, the economy has been de-industrializing, and the formal economy has shrunk in tandem with that. For instance, the share of informal employment to total employment has risen from 84.2% in 2011 to 94.5% in 2014, signifying high levels of poverty and vulnerability. Informality discourages investment and weakens the overall competitiveness of the economy. Given the issues flagged earlier, it therefore becomes imperative to interrogate both public and private sector wage determination to tease out the current trends, structure, and institutional and legal framework in place. USAID-SERA therefore provided technical support to the Economic Research Institute of Zimbabwe, LEDRIZ, to undertake the study titled Remuneration Structure and Labor Costs in Zimbabwe, an analysis of flexibility, competitiveness, and equity. This was meant to assess whether the wage levels across the sectors were sustainable, affordable, as well as implications on the economy. The study focused on a review of the wage structure, public-private wage differentials, and the institutions governing the determination of wages over the period 2009 to 2015. Dr. Prosper Chitambara, a senior economist who delivered the research, shares more on the motivation of the study.
Our involvement basically with the USAID-SERA program was when they subcontracted us to do a study on the wage structure and labor costs in Zimbabwe. That was last year around October, November. So we actually carried out research and analysis on the structure of wages in Zimbabwe, comparing the wage structure obtaining in the public sector and also in the private sector, and also analyzing the labor costs to see to what extent labor costs in Zimbabwe are actually militating against competitiveness. As you know, Zimbabwe has a huge competitiveness gap, and one of the sources of that gap is through our high labor costs.
Growth in the public wage bill has far outstripped growth in real GDP. This is not sustainable. For instance, in 2014, the growth in the bill was 16.5% compared to the real GDP growth of 3.1% for the same year. The public sector wage bill is now consuming fiscal and debt sustainability. It is also generating excessive fiscal deficits and limiting scope for government to invest in capital development projects. Thus, the government should immediately implement a wage policy that is fiscally sustainable. In sub-Saharan Africa, Zimbabwe spends more on public sector wages in comparison to its peers. A civil service audit carried out between February and April 2015 to weed out ghost workers from the civil service payroll has made recommendations for reforms to meet the government's target of reducing the wage bill from 80% to under 40% of revenue. The government should make use of modern identification technologies which captures biometric data to improve payroll administration and weed out ghost employees. Turning to wage differentials between management and ordinary workers, we observe that there are huge income disparities between top management, middle management, and ordinary workers within most enterprises. Since 2009, the income disparities between the highest and lowest paid have continued to widen. This reflects the different ways of determining the levels with collective bargaining at the lower echelons and entitlement-based contracts at the top. Labor costs are higher in Zimbabwe than they are in Zambia, Botswana, and Mozambique. The country, however, has a labor cost advantage relative to South Africa. What are the key policy recommendations? Establish fiscal rules to put a ceiling on the public sector wage bill. This could encompass capping expenditure on wages and benefits at most at 35% of taxes and not more than 10% of GDP. The government should undertake a process of biometric payroll registration of all the public service. The biometric payroll data will then be used to reflect salary payments. This study was validated at a high-level stakeholders workshop on the 7th of April 2016, which was attended by more than 100 delegates. The workshop, which was officially opened by the Secretary for Public Service, Labour and Social Services, agreed on all recommendations. The Secretary, Mr. Masoka, pledged his commitment to making use of the policy recommendations by saying, "We as government find these findings very useful. We are currently seized with labour market reforms, and hence the report will be a useful resource."